Good evening, film fans. Tonight I want to talk about one of my favorite B science fiction movies, 2003's Sumuru, which was directed by Darrell Roodt and produced and partly written by Harry Alan Towers, a very prolific um, British producer of both movies and radio programs. He did all of the Christopher Lee Fu Manchu movies. He did Cage of Evil, Circus of Evil, rather. And Cage of Fear, a film noir, and a bunch of other film noirs. And also, he did romances, he did westerns, he did musicals, he did everything basically. A very, very prolific producer. And if I listed all of his films, it would take me an hour, so I'm not going to. It stars Alexandra Kamp, who is a gorgeous German redhead. She's 57 now, and she's still gorgeous, believe me. And also Simona Levin, who plays her rival Taxan, the quote-unquote living serpent goddess. Her name, she's also known as Simona Williams. It's the same actress. Michael Shanks plays Adam Wade. You may know him from Stargate. And also Terrence Bridgett plays Jake Carpenter. David Lazarus plays Will, a young boy. And KCB Dolan, a very pretty girl, plays Dove, his sister and protector. Michelle Bradshaw plays one of Taxan's lieutenants who has an important role at the end, which I'll get into. And Claire Evans plays another one of Taxan's bodyguards, a rather gorgeous, tall British lady. And Clive Scott plays a miner, and Nadia Kretchmer plays one of Sumuru's guards, so it's her guard captain. The story is interesting. It's about two astronauts from Earth who are trying to investigate a very distant Earth colony, the planet Antares, not the star Antares, but the planet Antares, though it may be in orbit of that star or somewhere near it. It's apparently the most distant Earth colony, and they lost contact with it over almost 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago, they say. And they're in orbit. They can't hear any radio signals or they don't see any indication of life, that the colony survived. And their mission is to find out what happened to the colony. They go down into the atmosphere. They're going to land, and they hit a bunch of really terrible turbulence. There's earthquakes and storms, and the ship crashes. Jake is very badly injured. A piece of metal embeds itself in his arm, and Adam takes him out of the ship and injects an antibiotic and a painkiller into his arm. And he says something interesting, because I think this is a little bit of a dig at Star Trek, but I don't know why they did it this way. He says in a Scottish accent, "I'm not a doctor, I'm a pilot." And I'm like, okay, they're like combining Scotty and Bones. Bones was the one who was always saying, "I'm not something, I'm a doctor." I'm not a bricklayer, Jim, I'm a doctor. But, I thought that was kind of interesting, a little bit of a dig at Star Trek, the original series. And they, anyway, he removes this piece of metal from Jake's arm, and he puts a patch on him and, gives him a little bit of first aid. And apparently Jake is starting to hallucinate because he thinks he hears and sees a dog. And Adam looks around, he doesn't see any dog. So he thinks that, the drugs are just having an effect on him, but he wants to go explore anyway. So he takes his blaster, and he's sort of walking around. He walks around an arroyo, and on the other side he sees a young boy dressed in what look like rags, basically. And he has a scruffy little dog with him, and he's running away from something, and he says, "The snakeheads are behind us." And he tries to question him, but he says, he just runs. He says, "Oh, snakeheads, huh?" And he doesn't know what that is. Meanwhile, we see Will continuing to run and look behind him. He's not looking in front of him, and the quote-unquote snakeheads, which include Taxan and some of her followers, surround him, and he has a little knife. He pulls it out. He's trying to be brave, but they're way stronger than him. They knock the knife out of his arm and hit him over the head and drag him away to apparently be a quote-unquote sacrifice. So that you don't know what that is yet. Adam follows Jake's footprints. He finds his knife, and then follows the footprints up to what looks like a temple, and that's actually the exterior anyway, is the Voortrekker Museum. And interior is a rather good set. Considering this, like I said, it was a low-budget movie, the sets are really good. The costumes are fantastic. The score is good. The editing is good. The lighting is good. And inside this building, it turns out to be some sort of a temple. And in the center is this enormous pit. And as the women are chanting Sumuru's name, Sumuru, Sumuru, over and over, and we finally see Sumuru as the queen of Antares, played by Alexandra Kamp, walk in. And then Taxan, who is Simona Levin's character, is starting to conduct this ceremony. And they're talking about making a sacrifice to the quote-unquote serpent mother. And all of a sudden we see this enormous cobra, it's like 200 feet high, exit this hole. And it's like hissing down at them. It's got these fangs that are like enormous, and it wants its sacrifice. Her sacrifices, apparently female, and then it's revealed that the sacrifice is Will, and his sister Dove, who is Sumuru's bodyguard, says, "No, that's my birth brother. You can't sacrifice him." She attacks one of Taxan's women with her like halberd, and they're having like a big fight, and the serpent, meanwhile, is waiting for her sacrifice, and he becomes impatient and eats Taxan's woman. And now Taxan's very upset, because both the ceremony has been disrupted and her woman has been killed, and women aren't supposed to kill women. Women on this planet are ruled. It's a matriarchal society. Women are allowed to kill men, but they're not allowed to kill women. And so this one guard has violated law, and she orders her killed, and Sumuru says, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm your queen. You don't get to say who gets to be killed, and that was her birth brother, that you were going to sacrifice, and I pardon him." She says, "You can't pardon a sacrifice to the serpent mother." And she says, "I just did." So she's just kind of putting her foot down. And now you see the beginnings of the struggle between Sumuru and Taxan, which goes on. And again, Simona Williams does a great job as Taxan. She plays it way over the top and just wonderful. She's sultry, she's seductive, she's sexy, and she's also really, really evil. And in an old style, Republic serial kind of way. So I think that fits in as very well with this movie. Anyway, Adam has been observing all this quietly inside the door of the temple. They don't see him. And then Jake calls him on his wrist communicator, and he says, "Like, Jake, don't, this is a bad time." And they say, "A man!" And they start, like, screaming, and he fires off his blaster at the ceiling, which just creates kind of a distraction so he can get away. He takes Will with him, says, "There's only one place we can go. We got to go back to the shuttle." And Taxan's women are running after him. They're firing crossbow bolts and arrows and throwing spears. And a couple of them actually have shotguns. And this is something I like about this society that they've created. They have both modern weapons and more archaic weapons, which indicates a decay of the society over time. And I like that idea. That was some decent world building. I suspect that was Harry Alan Towers' writing. Anyway, they're chasing him back to the ship. Adam is at the leg, gets Will into the ship, and then he's hit in the leg by an arrow from one of Taxan's archers. And he falls down into the ship, and Will's trying to take the arrow out, and he says, "No, don't do that." He says, "I have to, it's poisoned." And he still won't let him touch him. And then Sumuru arrives and basically confronts Taxan's words and says, "These are my prisoners. I'm the queen here." She says, "I don't serve you. I serve Goddess Taxan." She says, "Well, then go back to her and tell her that these are my prisoners, and she's to keep her hands off them." And she goes down into the ship and sees, that Adam is wounded, and she removes the arrow very painfully, apparently, and then applies a salve that'll, an antidote to the serpent poison that they've tipped this arrow with, and demands that he be brought back to the city. And Jake says something like, "Wait a minute." She says, "Quiet," because men aren't allowed to, talk that way to women in this society. So her guards escort them both back to the temple, the city, I should say, or the village, they call it. Meanwhile, we see a scene between Dove and Will, where she's telling Will, "I can't keep getting you out of trouble like this. You got to stay away from the city and stay away from the temple. I told you that before." And he says, "I hardly get to see you anymore when, now since you're Sumuru's bodyguard. She says, it's because I'm Sumeru's bodyguard that I was able to save you. But if you keep doing stuff like this, you know, I'm not going to be able to. I'll be fired as her bodyguard, and I won't be able to protect you. She promises she'll come back later and read him a story, and so he takes off, and they take Jake and Adam back to the city, try to put them in sort of a holding cell, and Jake and Adam are talking, and Jake comments, we've only seen women so far, except for Will in this city, and maybe the gene virus has struck already and wiped out all the men. Jake says, no, if that happened, they would have died out over 900 years ago. Their civilization would have been destroyed, and that makes sense. Then they take out this instrument, which is actually just an old-style flip phone, but they make it look like a medical scanner. Did a fairly decent job on that with the special effects. And they're scanning each other, and they're both still, quote-unquote, clean, whatever that. They haven't explained that quite yet. And Will sees them and says, what was that thing? And he says, you mean this? He says, is it magic? And he says, no, it's not magic. It's just science. It'll tell you, if you have any bad bugs in you. And he runs it over Jake's arm and says, I'm okay. And Dove is observing this. She says, hey, what's that? What are you doing to my brother? He says, nothing. And this just proves he doesn't have any diseases. She's a little circumspect, says, well, Sumuru wants to see you now, but she's only talking about Adam. And, come along. And, she wants to see you alone. Jake's a little bit resentful, but he stays back and he's kind of talking to Will, kind of trying to entertain him a little bit. He's kind of taking a shine to him. And then, we see Adam is brought into Sumuru's presence and she's bathing. And although we don't actually see her naked, we just see water running down her really long, resplendent hair and down her back. Adam is obviously quite smitten. And if you've seen her layout in the 2007 German edition of Playboy, you'll understand why he's smitten. I recommend, if you look at it, that you take some heart medication, even if don't have a bad heart, because you'll definitely have palpitations. But anyway, she then is dressed by her ladies in waiting and agrees to speak with Adam, and she's asking him, the basic questions that anybody would ask, why did you come here? Where are you from? What are you doing here? And he tells her, well, Earth lost contact with this colony over 900 years ago. She said, well, what took you so long to get here? So, well, there was a war followed by another war, and people had to rebuild, were more concerned about rebuilding society than going to the most distant Earth colony. And we think that, we're from a planet called Earth, and we think your ancestors were from Earth also. And that had happened, we lost contact with you, and it's been 900 years since anybody's spoken with you. And we were getting regular reports from this colony, and then all of a sudden they just stopped, and that's why they sent us here to find out why. That's not entirely the truth, but he also shows her like a holographic image of Earth. She says, someone with a lesser mind would think of this as magic. He says, no, it's just science. It's a hologram projector. And she apparently grasps that. She also grasps how to use his weapon. She says, not difficult for a queen to figure out how to use this, and proves it by firing it off at the ceiling. And says, be careful with that. You could put somebody's eye out. There's a lot of little kind of dumb jokes in here. But then he asks her, we've only seen women here. Where are the men on your planet? And she says, you want to see them? I'll show them to you. And takes them to the mines where they mine oil and gas. And that's what they think is causing the quakes. Though we have been told, and Jake has said, that the planet's breaking up. Its tectonics are shot, basically, and that it has maybe 2 to 3 months altogether before the whole planet is destroyed. And Sumuru also explains to Adam that the serpent religion was created originally because people were so frightened of the quakes that they started to panic. So they gave him this idea that the quakes were caused whenever the serpent goddess was displeased and needed another sacrifice. So that's how that whole first scene took place. Takes them to the mines where she says that they mine oil and gas. he sees that the miners are all men, and that's the men of Antari, she says, and they're all basically slaves, and he comes to realize that and starts having kind of an argument. She said, well, this is just the way things are, men work and women rule. Men don't have brains, they have, bodies, and he gets really upset at that, and they have kind of an argument. She kisses him rather hard, and he says, oh, is that a kiss before you send me to the mines? And she says, I'm not going to send you to the mines. I want to ask you more questions and find out about your civilization. Well, he's kind of pissed off, and they get into a physical fight. She punches him in the face, and he doesn't fall down, and they get into sort of a sparring thing, and he ends up putting her in a chokehold, and then her guards, she tries to whip him, and he puts her in this chokehold, and her guards come and, peel him off. She says, lock him up, and the other one too, and as Dove and the other guards are taking him away, Taxan says to her guards, I want the spaceman. I want to interrogate him. Ambush those guards and kill him and bring him to me. And so they're going back to the city, and that's what happens. And Will sees this starting to take place. He says, ambush, but it's too late. The Taxan's women have guns and arrows, and they kill 3 or 4 of Sumuru's guards, including Dove, Will's sister. And he's very upset. He's saying, no, Dove, don't die, don't die. But, she does. She says, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. And that's kind of a heart-wrenching scene. Very well done, very well acted. And then, Jake and Adam are now prisoners with Taxan. Adam is interrogated by her, and she's asking the same kind of questions that Sumuru did. Why are you here? Where did you come from? She's asking about the blaster and the technology. He says, well, your queen has that now. And she says, do you have more weapons on your ship? And he says, well, we might. And she says, give them to me. And, she says, I don't trust you. And she starts kind of being a little bit seductive, but she's not really, that interested. She's more interested in like his technology and what he can do than him. He sees an old TV screen monitor, computer monitor rather, and he can activate it with his wrist communicator. But it has run out of power. There's a snake on top of it that starts crawling down, and he kills it. She says, that's one of my sacred children. The penalty for killing one of them is death. She says, but, I've just commuted that penalty. And then she starts, kisses him and starts trying to seduce him, and she's trying to steal his communicator while she's doing this. And he prevents her. She pulls out a knife, but he knocks that out of her hand. And she says, now you'll die. And then 2 of her guards come in. She summons her guards and says, take them away. And they says, you're the one who's going to be taken away. It's actually Sumuru and Jake in one of the in her snakehead outfits, including, much to Jake's embarrassment, the outfit has a bustier in it. And he says, I got to get out of this thing. And they are now kind of on the run from Taxan and her guards. And Will says he can lead them to a way out, but the way out is too small for them. It's only big enough for him to get away. And she says, what's down there? And Jake says, what's down there? She says, you don't want to go there. That leads to the surface, and it's deadly. And he looks at Will and says, what's down there? And he says, it's a prison. And Jake gets this disgusted look on his prison. And they go down, and it's the men from the mines are kept basically in this horrible condition in a cage, basically. And both Jake and Adam are disgusted at this. And says, how do you open this cage? And Sumuru says, we don't. You've caused enough trouble to my society already. But then the snakeheads come back, and they again kill a couple more of Sumuru's guards, and they're panicking now. And Will shows them that there's a lever that they can use, a wheel that will open the prison gate, and they do it. And Adam, orders the men to, come up. They won't. They're so used to being ruled by Sumuru, they won't come up until she says it's okay. And then when she does, they run away and they escape. They go into the desert to avoid, Taxan's women. There are a couple more quakes, and they're all shaken up. And Jake says, I may have been wrong about this planet. We may have less time than I thought. Then Summer was talking about how it was a mistake to release the slaves from the pen, and Jake gets really upset, and Adam says, go take a walk. He says, what do you mean? He says, just go take a walk. you too, he says to Sumeru's guard captain. That's Nadia Kretchmer. And they go away, and he says, this is a bit more than just personal to Jake. And she says, what do you mean? He says, his parents were taken away to a slave labor camp when he was a young boy. He knows what it's like to have nothing and to be treated like nothing. And Sumuru gives him kind of a shocked look and says, yeah, there's a lot more to us than you think. And then he tells her the truth about the gene virus. That there was one of these wars that broke out on Earth was bacteriological or biological weapons were used, and almost all of Earth's populace was made sterile by this virus. He and Jake are two of the last remaining sterile Earth people, and one of the reasons they came to the colony is every other colony they visited was affected by the gene virus. This is the only one that was far out enough that doesn't appear that they have this virus, and because it's spread out to all the Earth colonies. And he tests Sumuru. In fact, she does not have the virus. So he's saying, we need you to survive, just as you need us to get you off this planet. She's still resistant. She's saying, all you've done is, brought ruin and, death, and I don't want any more women to die. And he says, well, where can we go now? She said, well, the only place we can go left is the burn zone. That's apparently a area of that was at least one point irradiated. There's an event that the women of Antares refer to as the quote-unquote light of death. And they say that the light of death was brought about by the snake mother who brought it was a judgment on men for their pride, and that's their history. Jake and Adam start figuring out that this terraforming colony had a primitive kind of a nuclear generator that wasn't very stable, and they think what really happened was there was an explosion, and the men were killed by the radiation, and the women were off somewhere else, and that's why they reformed society sort of the way they wanted to their needs, so they go into the quote-unquote. There's a pendant that Sumuru wears around her neck that has a hologram, and Jake looks at it and says, "That's an old-style colony ship. Have you seen something like this?" And she says, "Well, there's rumors that there's one in the burn zone." And he says, "If this is still functional, we could get out of here. If I can get it up and running." And so now they have a goal and a possible plan of escape. They have to get there first because, again, Taxon's warriors are still following them and shooting at them and trying to prevent them from getting in there. They get in first, and this is where they enter the disused explosives factory. And it kind of looks like a factory. There's lots of pipes and old kind of computers and some strange-looking equipment. Again, the sets are not terrible. Obviously, part of it's a set, part of it's the building. Doesn't look very sophisticated, but it's not supposed to be. This is supposed to be an archaic colony, and it looks that way. Lots of dust, grime over everything. So Jake finds the generator and says, "I think I can power the ship up. Why don't you go take a look at it and see if it's still functional?" And Adam goes and brings Sumuru with him, and her guard captain sees the ship, and he says, it's the 1,000-year-old technology, but I think that's our only hope to get off this planet. Sumuru says, why do you think I'm going with you? And, I want you and, that other male off my planet. He explains to her, that the Quakes are not the Serpent Mother, that the planet is breaking up, and that if they don't leave, they're all going to be killed. All the colonists, women and men. And so she has to consider that now. They're starting to power up the generator, and Jake is using Will to help him, basically to give him something to do, and also to act as a lookout. And he alerts him to the fact that Taxon breaks into the building with a couple of her guards, and they start shooting at them, and he has to shut the generator down for a moment so it's not damaged. He's started to power up the ship, but he hasn't finished. Then Taxon shows up. She says, "Where's the traitor Sumuru?" And Sumuru spins around and says, "Here, Taxon." And she says she's mine, and she wants to take Taxon herself. So they go into single combat, and basically they're fighting with what look like long staves, quarter staves for a bit, and then they devolve into they knock those out of each other's hands, and they go to daggers, and the daggers are sort of snake-like. And I should mention that so one of the great things that Simona Levin does, she doesn't really say her lines. She hisses them like a snake. And considering that she's supposed to be the quote unquote living serpent goddess, that really works for her character, makes her much more menacing. Uh, and she's going after her. They're fighting with these knives, and it looks like she has the upper hand over uh, Sumuru and is going to kill her. And then Adam appears and says, Sumuru, we got to get out of here. This whole place is going to blow. And she pushes her back violently. She hits an electrical panel and is electrocuted and falls down. And that's the end of her, we think. And then they're running back towards the ship. And of course, as happens to all, snarling villains in these kind of, movies, like something out of a Republic serial, Texan's not dead quite yet. She screams, and even though she's all burnt, she still grabs her dagger. She's running towards Sumuru with it, and Adam just shoots her with a blaster, which I thought was great. And her head falls on a twisted angle like this. She has this stunned look on her face, like just really, really well done. Simona Levin did a fantastic job as this over-the-top, evil character. So now they go to the ship and they take off and manage to get it all powered up. They clear the bay doors, and even though the ship is shaking a bit and there's been a few more quakes, they're flying over the landscape, and Sumuru says, those are my people down there. Sees a bunch of people standing on the hill, including some of Taxan's old followers and the temple priestesses and the gas miners as well. And Adam says, well, the ship probably has enough room to take all those people, and he orders Jake to land. He says, "You're kidding, the planet's going to break apart any minute. We don't have time." He says, "Make the time." Okay, but we've got very little time left. And they land on the hilltop where these people are gathered. Sumuru appears and says, "My people, we all have to take a journey. We're all going to the stars together, and we need to leave here." And at first they're kind of reluctant, and she raises her arms and says, "Come on, everybody, stand up." And one of the miners who had witnessed the fight between her and Adam when she tried to hit him with her whip says, "You lost this, my queen," and brings the whip back to her and hands it to her. And she says, "I don't need it anymore. I don't want it anymore," throws it away. So she's changed her character. She's not this terrible dictator anymore. She's now willing to listen to other points of view, which I thought was really good. And I think, again, Alexandra Kamp did a really good acting job in this. She's quite a good actress. Unfortunately, most of her work has been in German films. She was in a terrible movie called Dracula 3000 and a very good parody called 2001: A Space Travesty with Leslie Nielsen. And a couple of other American movies. Most of her stuff is in German. Done a couple of TV series, too. I saw a picture of her recently. She's still gorgeous, even though she's 57 now, which means she was like 20-something when they did, like 21 when she did this movie. They get into the spaceship. Everybody climbs aboard, and they take off. They're trying to take off, and there's something holding them back. And they think it's another quake. And they see it's not a quake. They look on the monitors. It's the Snake Mother. She's grabbed the ship by one of the pilots and is shaking it, trying to destroy it, trying to prevent them from leaving. They fire off one of the thrusters, which burns her, and she falls back. And then they position the ship so that the main thrusters are aimed towards her, and they set it off and burn her up, kind of like what happened to the xenomorph in Alien. Then they take off into the atmosphere with everybody. As Will is kind of trying to help Jake, and Jake's teaching him some things, one of Taxan's former warriors comes up, and she's got his dog with her. That's the dog's name, Dog. And Sumuru says, "Oh, how cute. What's his name?" He says, "Dog." She says, "Dog?" And Jake says, "Well, Dog, it's a name." And, they're going off. And then he says, Adam takes his headset off, hands it to Will, and says, "Here, get your first flying lesson from Jake." And he and Sumuru walk off. And, she says rather tellingly, "I never knew I, needed anybody's help before." Adam says, maybe it's not such a matter of needing somebody, needing somebody's help. And she says, or as wanting someone's help, and then they kiss, and he's obviously been quite smitten with her since he saw her in the shower. And like I said, if you've seen that Playboy spread, you understand why. She's absolutely stunning. And you know, they kiss, and then she says, as they're heading off, they're going to go back to Sirius, which is quite a long ways away. If my calculations are, if they were actually at Antares, Antares is 400 light years from Earth. Sirius is only 8 light years, so that's quite a long distance they have to go. And they get the ship powered up, and she says, a whole new galaxy to conquer, and he says, I just hope we don't screw it up, and that's the last line, and they jump into hyperspace, and the credits roll. I think it's a really decent movie. It apparently has a bit of a cult following, though. I sometimes think the cult following is just me, because I like to watch this a couple of times a year. I get a heck of a kick out of it. It's fun, it's funny, it's well written, well acted, and I think it's really well done. Like I said, the costumes are fantastic. The soundtrack is really good too. It has a kind of a Blade Runner-ish score, which I really like, and well edited, well directed, well lit. Fantastic acting by everybody, and particularly by Michael Shanks and by Alexandra Kamp. So it's very well worth watching, and I highly recommend it.